teremos a imensa satisfação de assistir à conferência do professor Seth Holmes. A ele agradeço ter aceitado o nosso convite para participar da 32ª reunião da Associação Brasileira de Antropologia, que completa 65 anos, sendo a mais antiga das associações em ciências sociais no Brasil. Nossa associação tem enfrentado o desafio de articular a produção científica, a organização e mobilização de diferentes redes de conhecimento, de gerar visibilidade, de estimular o debate em tempos sombrios de resistência. A aba assume posições políticas frente a um cenário governamental que desqualifica os direitos estabelecidos pela Constituição e que tem atacado sistematicamente as ciências humanas. O sentido do que fazemos é o de enfrentar e estabelecer um diálogo com a antropologia que fazemos e com a antropologia que se faz no mundo. Aí está a importância estratégica de resistir ao autoritarismo e aos abusos, com conhecimento, com troca e com a insubmissão dos saberes.
Então, muito obrigada, Bibi e Sérgio, amigos de longa data, pelo esforço extra desenvolvido para manter esta reunião em tempos de Covid e em tempos de política tão difícil. Tempos melhores virão, nós sabemos, mas aguentar o carro até que cheguem e abrir o caminho para que cheguem não é fácil nem garantido. Por isso, aceitem a minha solidariedade, todos os meus colegas daqui, e os meus parabéns. Força! O mesmo estendo a todos e todas que na aba e no apoio técnico permitem que esta reunião consiga realizar-se. E uma saudação especial a todos os queridos colegas e estudantes de antropologia que no Brasil lutam diariamente contra a aniquilação do pensamento crítico, do nosso trabalho, da nossa lucidez, do nosso engajamento, coragem e muita força que não conseguirão destruir-nos. Neste ambiente, ninguém melhor que o querido colega Seth Holmes para apresentar. Seth Holmes tem uma ainda breve, porque é bastante jovem, porém intensíssima carreira de antropologia engajada, simultaneamente no trabalho de análise crítica e de intervenção em temas-chave da contemporaneidade, na saúde, nas migrações, no exercício da clínica, no exercício da cidadania, na complexa cadeia de produção e consumo de alimentos, nas desigualdades sociais. É um antropólogo dos tempos contemporâneos como nós precisamos ter. O seu primeiro livro, inicialmente publicado na Universidade da Califórnia, Fresh Fruit, Broken Bodies, e já traduzido em várias línguas, o Marcelo vai falar da tradução em português, é incomparável. Posso dizer que no meu grupo de pesquisa The Color of Labor, esta foi uma das primeiras obras que o grupo leu para discussão, logo a seguir ao Sidney Mint's Sweetness and Power. Estão a ver a importância que eu dei. Mal eu sabia, ao tempo, não imaginávamos que não só íamos conhecer o Seth de perto, como acolher a tradução do livro dele, feita por colegas nossos, não foi por nós, foi pelo Monde Diplomatique, e ainda tê-lo como associado ao projeto, coisa que ainda não aconteceu fisicamente, porque em Covid, em França e em Portugal, agora não se pode andar à vontade, mas espero que em breve ele vá se juntar a nós, tal como o Marcelo esteve durante algum tempo no ano passado e foi fantástico. Bom, de que trata o livro? Já vou falar do resto da obra. O livro é uma etnografia muito inovadora, feita por alguém que acompanha um grupo de migrantes indígenas mexicanos da zona do Oaxaca que vão para norte, muito para norte, vão até ao estado de Washington trabalhar como trabalhadores, apanhadores de fruta temporários numas fazendas que não são a traditional plantation, não são a grande plantação, mas são fazendas de produção de fruta orgânica, biológica, para consumidores com determinados requisitos. Então, há muitos paradoxos nesta situação. Eu não vou descrever todos, quero que leiam o livro, já está disponível em português ainda por cima, é fantástico. Portanto, tudo o que é de intensidade dramática numa etnografia que, com o corpo e a pessoa, se acompanha a aventura da migração clandestina, com todo o perigo que isso inclui, e depois o paradoxo de estar numa fazenda que é de filhos de migrantes que alcançaram a cidadania há poucas gerações e que estão a produzir para um mercado especial e estão ao mesmo tempo a usar uma mão de obra dessa natureza, leva-nos para muitos dos nós contemporâneos que a antropologia quer alcançar, está sempre a renovar-se. E o trabalho do Seth é um bom exemplo disso. Depois desse livro, que foi amplamente premiado, o Seth continua a trabalhar engajado em muitas frentes, é agora professor na Universidade de Califórnia, Berkeley, além de ser também médico clínico. O Seth é agora do Departamento de Saúde e Ambiente da Universidade de Califórnia, Berkeley, e está ligado àquele famoso departamento, àquele famoso programa de doutoramento em antropologia médica que junta Berkeley e São Francisco. Ele é mentor de um número enorme de estudantes, é amado pelos seus estudantes e suas estudantes muitíssimo, dizem que está sempre disponível e ajuda-os a abrir caminhos nesta antropologia para os tempos difíceis em que estamos. Okay? Não é só no Brasil que as coisas estão difíceis, nos Estados Unidos estão muito difíceis também. Já fiz vários trabalhos de destaque que eu aconselho a ler depois desse livro. Um deles, um artigo no American Ethnologist, que aborda a questão dos refugiados e imigrantes na Europa contemporânea, um ponto de vista a partir da Alemanha. Mais uma inovação, mas tudo conflui para um pensamento complexo sobre desigualdades e cidadania no mundo contemporâneo. Finalmente, não vou alongar muito mais, tem uma linha de trabalho muitíssimo interessante sobre a produção de alimentos. Portanto, ele abordou a produção de alimentos junto com aqueles que estavam responsáveis pela apanha, portanto, os novos catadores de cana, não catadores de cana, mas berry pickers, e consegue analisar com um olho de antropologia médica o que é a morte lenta e o que é o exercício da biopolítica na produção agrícola. O que é a morte lenta do corpo do trabalhador envolvido numa produção em cadeia horária tão intensa que nem pode ir ao banheiro, nem pode comer, nem pode nada para produzir as metas que tem a cada dia na apanha de frutos silvestres, frutos bagas, e depois acompanha o sofrimento do corpo ao longo do resto da cadeia alimentar. Além disso, o Seth tem mais projetos que envolvem o próprio exercício da clínica e da medicina em tempos ou em circunstâncias, estruturas de desigualdade social. Eu acho que já falei bastante, vocês querem ouvir o Seth e não a mim. Obrigada. Thank you very much, Seth, for having accepted. Thank you all at ABA for this wonderful initiative. And now I'm hearing and thanking you for being present.
Bom, após essa alentada apresentação de Cristiana Bastos, eu só queria acrescentar que o livro de Seth, tão mencionado agora há pouco, um excelente livro, incrível livro, foi publicado em português, foi traduzido, Le Monde Diplomatique, chamado Corpos Existentes, Imigração, Racismo e Trabalho Agrícola nos Estados Unidos. Chama atenção rapidamente apenas para as diversas inovações no próprio método etnográfico de Seth, também as diversas combinações para além da antropologia, né? Como mencionado, Seth é médico e traz abordagens extremamente criativas em seu campo. A análise da própria cadeia produtiva de alimentos é extremamente relevante e atual, inclusive no contexto brasileiro, que justamente aborda as intersecções entre lógicas do mercado, racismo, privação de direitos sociais, imigração e a maneira pela qual essas pessoas fazem a sua vida em percursos muitas vezes precários. É importante notar que Seth acompanhou os trabalhadores e trabalhadoras agrícolas desde o México até os Estados Unidos, né, e nos traz, então, um livro difícil aqui de resumir, deve ser conferido. Foi um livro premiado, recebeu vários prêmios, dentre os quais Margaret Mead Award, em 2015, Então, vou ser muito breve. Verdadeiramente, acho que agora todo mundo está aqui online para escutar a Seth. Muito obrigado a todos vocês.
Muito obrigado. It's a great honor to give a lecture to the 32nd annual meeting of Brazilian anthropology for the UFBA. Thank you, Bibia, Sergio, Cristiana, Mateus, Marcelo, Carol, for having me. I wish we could be in person in Rio, and really it is a great honor for me as a social anthropologist and as a physician to give a lecture to this group, both because of the powerful resources and thinkers and innovation and engagement in anthropology in Brazil, and also in social medicine and collective health. So thank you again for having me. I'll share my slides. So today I'll give a lecture entitled Immigration Health and the Invisibilization of Inequity. This comes from my own research, but has implications and reverberations with much of what's going on in the world today, both in the United States, in Europe, in Latin America, and Brazil. Some of you, let me see how to move forward. Some of you might be familiar with my book, Fresh Fruit, Broken Bodies, Migrant Farm Workers in the United States, which Cristiana and Marcelo mentioned was published in Portuguese recently. What I'd like to do today is share some of the analysis and ethnography from the book, but some of the ways I've been rethinking this work, and some of the ways this work has led me into new projects, including some thoughts related to what is happening in this particular moment of racial capitalism in relation to immigration and coronavirus. And after the talk, I'm happy to answer questions. A few of my slides are blank, and it's not an accident. It's because there's something that I'm talking about that seems important to have a focus on. I should also say, as an anthropologist at Berkeley, I'm trained to read you a paper, which sometimes I find a little bit boring in the audience. As a physician, I'm trained to give you a PowerPoint presentation, which sometimes I find a little bit boring in an audience. So today I'll do both. There are two primary problems that animate my research, all of my different projects. The first is, how do social structures and social hierarchies produce health, well-being, injury, and disease for different categories of people? In this project, specifically, how are indigenous Mexican migrants positioned by categories of race, class, multi-layered citizenship throughout their transnational circuits, and how does that positioning produce health, illness, and suffering? The second question for me is, how do social hierarchies and socially structured sickness both come to be understood as normal and natural and treated as normal and natural, both in society and in healthcare? And when are these inequities confronted and resisted? Specifically in this project, how do representations both in public culture and in the health sciences and in the clinic make invisible or legitimate the predicaments and sicknesses of indigenous Mexican farm workers in the United States? I'll spend the first section of this talk setting the ethnographic scene, mapping some of the sociality and spatiality on the farm, and then move into analyzing and theorizing these two problems. The National Agricultural Worker Survey in the United States indicates that over 80% of farm workers are immigrants, over 95% of whom were born in Mexico, and more than half of whom are undocumented. It's estimated there are more than 1 million indigenous people from the Mexican state of Oaxaca, primarily Mixtec, Zapotec, and Triqui people, who speak Mixtec, Zapotec, and Triqui, before they learn Spanish in their schools. Transnational migration is also interesting in Brazil, in Europe, related to people leaving to Europe, people coming from other countries, as economic situations change and as violence increases and changes in different regions. You all know much more than I do about the situation of indigenous people in Brazil and how that's changed in recent years as well. In terms of health, Mexican migrant farm workers have very poor outcomes. Agricultural workers have a death rate directly from their work 5 times higher than the national average. And migrant and seasonal workers have increased rates of injuries, HIV, tuberculosis, heat stroke, malnutrition, sterility, liver and kidney disease. But despite this poor health status, migrant farm workers have very poor access to healthcare. In the United States, it's estimated that only 5% have health insurance. And even though there's a federally funded migrant health program that funds migrant clinics, it's estimated that this program serves between 10 and 15% of the intended population. And despite the increased occupational injury rate, farm workers are excluded from workers' compensation, including healthcare in most states. And finally, recent research indicates that indigenous Mexican migrants have significantly lower rates of health insurance than their mestizo Mexican counterparts. This transnational ethnographic project involved Follow the People multi-sited fieldwork, accompanying indigenous Triqui migrants from the Mexican state of Oaxaca. The fieldwork began in Washington state and involved 5 months living in a labor camp shack, picking strawberries twice a week, accompanying migrant workers to clinics, hospitals, and interviewing farm employees, migrant health doctors, and area residents. I then accompanied several Triqui extended families as they migrated and spent 3 months in Central California. First, we lived homeless in our cars using a city park bathroom, and then moved into a 3-bedroom apartment with 19 people looking for work, occasionally pruning grape vineyards. And again, I accompanied migrant laborers to clinics and interviewed farm workers, doctors, and nurses. Next, I spent 4 months in the Triqui village, home village that I'll call San Miguel in the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico, in a partially constructed house of one of the families I met in Washington state and lived with in California. I helped with house construction, harvesting, and planting corn, and again, observed interactions in the village's clinic. In April of that year, I accompanied 10 young men from this village as they ventured to a border town, made contact with a coyote, a border crossing guide, and then crossed the border into Arizona by foot, were apprehended by the Border Patrol and put into Border Patrol jail. After my companions were deported back to Mexico and I was released from jail with a fine, I interviewed Border Patrol officers, border activists, and civilian vigilantes before returning to California to meet up with my Triqui companions, who then crossed a few weeks later. And I've returned to each of these sites and continued to work with these families over the last several years. The rest of this particular talk will take place in the Skagit Valley of Washington state, halfway between Seattle, Washington, and Vancouver, Canada. The Tanaka farm is the largest farm in the Skagit Valley, employing 500 people in the peak of the picking season, June through October. The farm advertises itself as, quote, a family business spanning 4 generations with over 85 years experience in the small fruit industry. And on a practical level, all of the employees work on the farm, growing, harvesting, processing, and selling berries toward these goals of the company. On another level, the structure of farm work adheres a subtle and complex hierarchy. The structure of labor is both determined by the asymmetries in society at large, specifically those organized around race, citizenship, gender, and class, and it reinforces those larger inequities. The structure of farm labor includes several hundred workers occupying many positions from owner to receptionist, field manager to tractor driver, berry checker to berry picker, and anxieties, privileges, and health differ from the top to the bottom of this labor organization. Next, I'll run quickly through this social structure, starting with the executives and moving forward towards the berry pickers. The third generation of Japanese American Tanaka brothers makes up the majority of executives on the farm. The others are Anglo-American professionals recruited from other businesses. The executives work seated behind desks in private offices and live in their own houses, many with panoramic views. They work long hours, usually starting before the sun comes up. They often take time off during the day to work out at a local gym, a fitness center, or meet their friends to eat lunch. They worry about farm survival in a bleak landscape of competition and economic globalization. The crop managers have private offices in a small field house several miles into the fields from the main farm office, though they spend a significant amount of time walking and overseeing what goes on in the fields. They work similar hours to the executives, but have somewhat less choice in when they take breaks. They're all Anglo-Americans and live in private houses in one of the nearby towns. The administrative assistants work seated at desks in common spaces and live in relatively simple family houses near the farm. They're almost entirely white, with a few US citizen Latinas from Texas. The teenage checkers, local white high school students, weigh the berries and spend much of their time waiting. Both the administrative assistants and the teenage checkers worry primarily about the moods and reactions of their supervisors. The other workers live in one of the labor camps. The first holds 50 people and is located 100 feet from the road. Each shack here has heating and insulation, and the field supervisors who walk outside, observing and directing the pickers, live here. Some treat their workers with respect, while others use outright racist epithets. They're bilingual in Spanish and English, almost entirely Latinx US citizens from Texas, along with one Mixteco indigenous man from the Mexican state of Oaxaca. The other camp, several miles away from farm headquarters, holds 250 people, and the shacks here have no heating and no insulation. This is where the majority of the farm's laborers, the strawberry pickers who are paid per pound, live. They're made up almost entirely of undocumented Triqui indigenous Mexicans. Marcelina, a 28-year-old Triqui picker, explained, "It's very difficult for a person here. I came to make money, like I thought here on the other side of the border there's money, but no. Sometimes the checkers steal pounds. Sometimes rotten berries make it into the bucket. Eat that one, they say, throwing it into your face. They don't work well. This is not good. There in Oaxaca, we don't have work. There are no jobs there. Only the men work sometimes, but since there are many children in my family, the men don't make money for me and my son. That's why I wanted to come here to make money, but no." In many ways, ethnicity, education, citizenship, I didn't take the appropriate position on the farm. For the purposes of my field research, I positioned myself in the housing and occupations of the Triqui undocumented immigrants. I picked twice a week and gained bodily data, including knee, back, and hip pain. I often felt sick to my stomach the night before picking due to my stress about reaching the minimum weight. But because of my social and cultural capital, the farm executives treated me as someone out of place, giving me special permission to keep my job and my labor camp shack, even though I was never able to pick the minimum weight. Crop managers and supervisors treated me as a sort of jester, as respected entertainment. They often joked with me, using rhetorical questions like, "Are you still glad you chose to pick?" And they would pick into my bucket to keep me from falling too far behind. On the other hand, the other pickers interacted with me with a mixture of respect and suspicion. Many wondered why there was a gabacho chacan, which in Spanish and triqui means bald-headed white American, which became my nickname, who was picking berries with them. Several people believed I was a spy for the police, the Border Patrol, or the US government, but others argued I might be a drug smuggler who was looking for a good cover and hiding out from the police or the Border Patrol or the US government. During dinner one evening in his labor camp shack, Samuel, the man standing up with the hat on, told me about problems that lack of resources created in his hometown and said they need a strong mayor, a strong presidente. I asked if he would be mayor someday. And clearly understanding social hierarchy, he replied, "No, you have to have education and money and ideas. You'll be presidente of San Miguel, Seth, and you can do a lot of good. We need a water pump and paved roads." Near the end of my research, Samuel told me, "Right now, we and you are the same, we're poor. But later you'll be rich and live in a luxury house, a casa de lujo." I explained that I didn't want a luxury house, but rather a simple house. And honestly, I was thinking of a little craftsman house built maybe 100 years ago that I had seen in Seattle or in Berkeley. And Samuel clarified his analysis, "But you'll have a bathroom on the inside, right?" The ethnicity and citizenship hierarchy that we just moved through not only produces the labor and housing pecking order that I described, but this whole complex maps onto the health inequities outlined at the beginning of this talk. The Triqui people inhabit the bottom rung of the hierarchy in the Skagit Valley with the most stressful, humiliating, and physically strenuous jobs, with the most exposure to weather and pesticides. They live in the coldest, wettest shacks in the most hidden labor camp. In her recent essay on obesity, literary scholar Lauren Berlant develops a theory she calls slow death. Exploring temporality, suffering, and agency within contemporary forms of racial capitalism, she defines slow death as, quote, "the physical wearing out of a population or deterioration of people in that population that's very nearly a defining condition of their experience and historical existence." She describes slow death as, quote, "the embodiment towards death as a way of life," unquote. She describes the ordinary and taken for granted attrition of life, agency, and the subject in the context of neoliberal racial capitalist exploitation. And she argues that slow death is, quote, "not memorable," unquote, and not capable of causing meaningful change because it's experienced as crisis ordinariness, as a defining characteristic of normal life for particular classes of people. Indigenous Mexican farm workers experience an everyday, ongoing life in the United States that is akin to the slow death described by Berlant. Migrant farm workers deal with myriad health problems due to the conditions in which they live and work, including chronic pesticide and heat exposure, repeated carrying of heavy loads, regular work with dangerous machinery, and protracted harvesting while bent over or kneeling. But it would be equally fair to mention that the chronic conditions that cause migrant farm worker injury include the re-regulation of the state in support of the market. For example, the North American Free Trade Agreement that disallows relatively poor countries from protecting their citizens with tariffs, while allowing wealthy countries to protect their products with inverse tariffs we call subsidies, as well as structural racism and anti-immigrant prejudice that effectively bar certain classes of people from specific jobs and funnel undocumented Mexican immigrants into some of the most dangerous and unhealthy positions in the society in the United States. Farm work is defined by the temporality and spatiality of slow death. Strawberry pickers on the farm in Washington state are required to bring in a minimum of 50 pounds of de-leafed strawberries every hour, Otherwise, they're fired and kicked out of the labor camp. In order to meet this requirement, they take few or no breaks from before sunrise until the afternoon when that field is completed. Many don't eat or drink anything before work, so they don't have to use time to use the porta potty. They work as hard and fast as they can, picking bent over at the waist, 7 days a week, rain or shine, without a day off until the last strawberry is processed. They leave their families and homelands to hike through a dangerous desert in order to survive. Yet these times and spaces of slow death are largely invisible as politicians ignore immigrant workers in the midst of ongoing debates of health reform. Because of the contemporary racialized, classed, and illegalized definitions of the categories Mexican, migrant, and farm worker, the chronic wearing out due to these labor and living conditions is deemed normal for, even essential to, those persons living within these social categories. For Mexican migrant farm workers in the United States, death is happening, meted out over time and space. After my first week on the farm, one young female picker told me that she could no longer feel anything in her body at all. Another said that her knees, back, and hips are, quote, always hurting. One of the young men I saw playing basketball before the harvest started told me that he and his friends could no longer play because their bodies hurt too much. And Abelino, a tricky father of 4 who lived near me in the labor camp, explained, "You pick with both hands at once, bent over, kneeling like this," and he demonstrated with both knees fully bent. "Your back hurts, you get knee pains and pain here," and he touched his hip. "When it rains, you get mad, but you have to keep picking. They don't give lunch breaks. You have to work every day like that to make anything. You suffer a lot in work." During my field research, most of my friends and family blamed the farm executives for the living and working conditions of berry pickers. They assumed that it was the growers' fault that the pickers live in such poor conditions and that the growers could easily rectify the situation. Here's an aerial view of the Skagit Valley from 1936 to 1996, leading up to the time of my research. And it demonstrates 2 things: expanding urban boundaries, the black and white areas, and you can see that smaller family farms are being bought by larger and more corporate farms. The hierarchy on the farm is not entirely conscious or willed on the part of the farm owners as individuals. Rather, the inequities are driven by structural violence, racial capitalism, as well as the anxieties it produces. The stark market competition and precarious future of the farm squeezes growers such that they worry about the potential bankruptcy of the farm, as well as their families' quality of life. The structural nature of the labor hierarchy comes into further relief when the hopes and values of the growers are considered. The Tanaka farm executives see themselves as ethical people who have a vision of a good society that includes family farming. They want to treat their workers well and leave a legacy for their children. Several of them asked for my opinions on how the labor camps should be improved. And perhaps instead of focusing primarily on the growers as individuals, it may be helpful for us also to understand them as human beings trying to lead ethical yet comfortable lives in the midst of a particular social, political, and economic system of racial capitalism. Now that we've considered the ethnicity citizenship hierarchy and the ways in which it produces sickness and injury on the farm, I'd like to move on to consider migrant health. First, I'll talk a little bit about the migrant clinic in general before moving on to the illness narratives of 2 tricky migrant laborers and their interactions with physicians and nurses. Medical professionals in the field of migrant health work under difficult circumstances with unreliable sources of funding. They often feel hopeless as they watch the health of their migrant patients systematically decline. Dr. Samuelson, a physician in the migrant clinic in the Skagit Valley, explained, "I see an awful lot of people just wearing out, 40-something or late 30s or early 50s. They're just worn out. They've been used and abused and worked physically harder than anybody should be expected to work for that number of years. Then they come out with this nagging back pain. You work it up and it's not getting better, and you don't think there's any malingering. It gets to the point where you just have to give them an MRI scan and their back is toast. In their early 40s, they have the arthritis of a 70-year-old and they're not getting better. They're told, sorry, go back to what you're doing, and they're stuck. They're screwed, in a word, and it's tragic, unquote. At the same time that most health professionals feel overworked and powerless to change the structural forces causing health problems for their migrant patients, they also voiced a commitment to work with this population. Many explained a feeling that Mexican migrant farm workers deserved the top quality healthcare, and most described a sense of calling to care for this population. Abelino, the tricky father of 4 who lived near me in the labor camp, experienced acute pain in his right knee when he pivoted from one row to the other while picking strawberries. After continuing his work in vain hopes that the pain would go away, he told his field supervisor about the incident, and the boss said simply, okay, and drove away. Unsure of what to do, Abelino kept picking in pain. 2 days later, work was abruptly canceled, and Abelino and I went into an urgent care clinic. Abelino ended up seeing 4 doctors and a physical therapist, usually without a translator in Spanish, much less tricky. And in the intervening months, he limped around camp, taking care of his kids while his wife picked in the fields. The urgent care doctor explained that Abelino should not work. He should rest and let his knee recover. The occupational health physician we saw the following week explained that Abelino could work, provided he didn't bend, walk, or stand for long periods. Abelino went to the farm office to ask for lighter work of this sort, and the bilingual receptionist told him in a frustrated tone, no porque no, and wouldn't let him talk with anyone else. After a few weeks, the occupational health doctor passed Abelino's care to a busy rehabilitation medicine physician who told Abelino and me that he must work hard picking strawberries in order to make his knee better. She asked me to translate that he had been picking incorrectly and hurt his knee because he didn't know how to bend over. But notably in her rush, she had not asked Abelino any details about his work, including how he bent over. And years later, Abelino still tells me that he has occasional knee pain and that, quote, los médicos no saben nada. The doctors don't know anything. Crescencio, another tricky man living near my labor camp shack, approached me after picking one day and asked if I had any medicines for headaches. He explained that every time a supervisor calls him names on the job, makes fun of him, or reprimands him unfairly, he gets an excruciating headache in the center of his head. He told me that the headaches made him prone to anger with his wife and children. He told me that he did not ever want to become violent with his family and wanted help for his headache before this could happen. He had seen a few physicians about it in Mexico and the US, as well as a traditional tricky healer, but nothing helped. The only thing that made his headache go away was drinking 20 to 24 beers, and then he would wake up without a headache. He had to use this remedy a few times in a given week, and I suggested he go to a migrant clinic to see if they could try something new for his problem. A week later, he told me that he'd seen one of the doctors in the clinic, but that, quote, they didn't know anything. Later, I interviewed this physician about the interaction. She was trained in one of the best medical schools in the United States and chose to work in this clinic because she wanted to ameliorate the suffering of marginalized populations. She was smart, idealistic, and hardworking in the midst of a busy, understaffed, and underfunded clinic. And after looking at her notes in his medical chart, she explained, yes, he thinks that he's the victim and thinks that the alcohol or the headache makes him beat his wife. But really, he's the perpetrator and everyone else is the victim. Until he owns his problem, he can't really change. Nothing really works. None of these migraine medicines or anything, but put people in jail because then they see a show of force. That's the only thing that works, because then they have to own the problem as theirs and they start to change. He came to see me once and I told him to come back 2 weeks later after not drinking, but he didn't come back 2 weeks later. He came back a month later. It looks like he told the doctor he saw that time something about when people at work tell him what to do, it makes him mad, and that's what gives him a headache. He needs to learn how to deal with authority. I referred him to therapy. Do you know if he's going to therapy? Despite this physician's idealism and good intentions, her busy, difficult job and her education did not allow her to see the social context of the suffering of her patients. In The Birth of the Clinic, Michel Foucault describes a theory of the clinical gaze. He explains that there was a change in clinical medicine around the time of the advent of cadaveric dissection. Whereas physicians used to focus on the words of the patient, the symptoms as expressed by the patient, they began instead to focus on the diseased organs, treating the patient as a series of objects that make up the body. In Foucault's description, the primary question changed from, quote, what is wrong, to, quote, where does it hurt? And this change was necessary for the birth of positivist science and contemporary forms of medical knowledge. As would be expected within this paradigm, the rehabilitation physician and the migrant health doctor described earlier saw the tricky bodies in their offices, yet were unable to engage the human and social context producing their sicknesses. Thus, it was unavoidable that they utilize a narrow lens that decontextualizes sickness, transporting it from the realm of politics, power, and inequity to the realm of the individual body. Yet since the time of Foucault, the paradigm of biopsychosocial health has been taken up in medicine. Beyond the acontextual gaze theorized by Foucault, physicians in North America today are taught to see behavioral factors in health, such as exercise, diet, substance use. Behavioral health education has been added to broaden health education. However, without being trained to consider the social structures that shape the suffering of their patients, health professionals are equipped to see only biological and behavioral determinants of sickness. Thus, well-meaning clinicians are limited to blaming the sickness on the patient. For example, the assumed incorrect bend while picking, or the supposed trouble with authority, without appreciating the hierarchies that position their patients in particular riskscapes in the first place. Ironically, the progressive move to include behavioral health in medical education without the inclusion of social analysis may be exactly that which leads clinicians to individualize risk and responsibility, inadvertently blaming the recipients of socially structured injury. So how has this order of inequities become unchallenged and unquestioned? How has it come to be understood as normal and natural? Pierre Bourdieu explains a theory he calls symbolic violence as the naturalization, including internalization, of social asymmetries. He explains that we perceive the social world through, quote, historically accreted schemata of perception, unquote, that are issued forth from that very social world. These cognitive schema, then, reflect the social world to which we've become accustomed. Thus, we misrecognize the social order as natural because that which we perceive matches the cognitive schema through which we perceive it. The inequities comprising the social world are thus made invisible, taken for granted, or normal for all involved. When I asked a mestiza Mexican social worker why tricky people have only berry-picking jobs, she explained, "A los oaxaqueños les gusta trabajar agachado." Oaxacans like to work bent over. Whereas she told me, mestizo Mexicans get too many pains if they work in the field. Later, I asked the farm's apple crop manager why I hadn't seen any tricky people harvesting apples, the field job with the highest pay. and he explained, Oaxacans are too short to reach the apples. They're too slow. They have to use ladders a lot more than some of the other guys. And besides, they don't like ladders anyway. He continued that Oaxacans are perfect for picking berries, quote, because they're lower to the ground, unquote. The same thing that a California senator said in a hearing about Mexican migrant labor. These perceptions of bodily difference along racialized lines serve as the lenses through which symbolic violence is enacted. In this way, each category of body is understood to deserve its relative social position. Because of what is perceived to be their natural characteristics, indigenous Mexican bodies are understood to belong picking berries as opposed to other jobs. On the other hand, mestizo Mexicans and white Americans are understood to have bodies that don't fit well in the picker category and belong in other positions. At the same time that symbolic violence involves the normalization of the social position of other groups, the theory also includes a subtle and complicated sense of internalization. One doesn't perceive only others, but also oneself as belonging in particular social locations. During my second day picking strawberries, a tractor with long metal extensions spraying something in the air drove through the field while we picked. I asked a supervisor what it was. Do you really want to know? You sure you want the truth? Dangerous insecticides, he said, shaking his head at me. The supervisor went on to explain that the white patches on the strawberry leaves are largely due to pesticide residue. I later noticed danger signs posted on several large canisters in English surrounding one of the hand washing and outhouse stations at the entrance to the field. Strawberry pickers worked every day without gloves as the visible pesticide residues dissolved in the mixture of strawberry juice that stained their hands dark maroon for the rest of the day. If they ate anything, they ate it in the fields while picking, often without washing their hands in order to save time and make the minimum weight. The same week as the spraying described above, I received a video I had ordered from the United Farm Workers about the health risks of pesticides. Several tricky pickers watched it with me, and afterwards I asked them what they thought. One told me matter-of-factly, pesticides affect only gabachos, white Americans, because your bodies are delicate and weak. Another confirmed, we tricky are strong and hold out, aguantamos. The others nodded. In this way, tricky people show a sense of ethnic pride that may be necessary in the midst of a history of discrimination and land dispossession in Mexico and the US. At the same time, this sense of pride may simultaneously justify their position in the labor hierarchy. In effect, tricky conceptions of honor at having stronger, tougher bodies might aid in making the destructive impact of their social position less visible. At the same time, it must be highlighted that Abelino and Crescencio continued to demand care and the possibility of living a livable life. As I write further in the book, they also participate in collective action, demanding healthier and more just working conditions on the farm. However, in certain ways, the indigenous Mexican migrant body is made to betray itself. Specifically because of perceptions of racialized difference, the migrant body is seen as belonging in its position in the very agricultural labor hierarchy that leads to its deterioration. The structural violence inherent to segregated labor on the farm is so effectively erased precisely because its disappearance takes place at the level of the body and thus is understood to be quintessentially natural. In conclusion, attention to what's hidden in transnational agriculture reveals a segregation of laboring bodies by perceived ethnicity and citizenship into a hierarchy that in turn produces injury. Such inequities are effectively naturalized through the symbolic violence enacted by perceived bodily differences along ethnic lines. In addition, migrant health professionals tend not to see the labor hierarchy nor its production of sickness through their clinical gaze. Instead, they often blame patients for their suffering and recommend interventions inadvertently complicit with the social hierarchy. The structural nature of these inequities is illuminated by the fact that even idealistic farmers and clinicians operate within a gray zone that neutralizes and sometimes reverses their efforts at moral action. If we as anthropologists of health are to orient our work toward contemporary problems and the potential for positive social change, we must denaturalize social inequities, uncovering linkages between structural violence, symbolic violence, and slow death. In this way, these schema of perception, as well as the social and political structures that they reinforce, can be transformed. In addition, the academic project of denaturalizing social and health inequities can inform pragmatic activist and policy efforts at many levels of a micro to macro continuum, from including pickers in farm English classes to including the social determination of health in medical education, from buying the products of farms that treat their workers fairly to the lobbying of politicians to change unrealistic, racist, and violent immigration policies. And finally, to activist and policy work for a more equitable global market, such that people may be free to, but are not forced to leave their homes to migrate in the first place. That's the end of my primary presentation. I wanted to say a couple, like 2 minutes of thoughts related to that. So I spent the month of May volunteering with Doctors Without Borders in Florida. It's the second time in history that Doctors Without Borders has come to the United States. In the area where Doctors Without Borders was working, Partners in Health is working, Coalition of Immokalee Workers, several other organizations to work with primarily Haitian and Guatemalan immigrant farm workers who work in the orange fields. One thing that became very clear is that the coastal cities and towns in that county of Florida were much more wealthy, had many more resources for social isolation, for protecting themselves, for working at home than the interior communities. Also, the coastal communities were almost entirely white, and the internal community was primarily Guatemalan and Haitian. So there was a large COVID outbreak in the interior of Florida related to the living and working conditions. There were community organizations that provided masks, that did trainings on the radio in Spanish and Haitian Creole and indigenous languages. At the same time, part of what Partners in Health was doing and Doctors Without Borders were pointing out the inequities in testing, contact tracing, and resources for isolation. So the left photograph is a photograph of a huge testing site in the same county on the coast in a primarily white and wealthier town that was open every day, all day long. And then the picture on the right is a picture of me doing testing, and Doctors Without Borders was doing testing, if they were lucky, maybe twice a week whenever they could get tests, and they often would run out of tests, so there was a huge disparity. Another thing that was important to keep in mind is the fact that these Haitian and Guatemalan people move. And so in the midst of the way the United States health programs work, they're all county-based or state-based, but these people were moving between Florida, New Jersey, Michigan, Maine, and there's an organization called Migrant Clinicians Network that was following up and providing caseworkers over WhatsApp. But in the end, it became very clear that racial capitalism and all the inequities involved we're putting these people who are providing us with food at extreme risk, and we need to work towards equity in healthcare and equity in their voices being heard politically so that they have a true democratic say in what their lives are like. One other thing I wanted to mention quickly is the Indigenous Triqui families and I have been working together on research for 15 years or so. And the Triqui youth, the high schoolers, and I are working together on a visual ethnography film that we hope will be coming out next month called First Time Home. And the youth are the ones doing the filming, and it tells the story of their lives between Oaxaca and the United States. So that, I think that's enough to talk about. I'm happy to answer any questions.